Is this a foreshadowing of the wall to come? In the background, GW uploaded the Orc Combat Patrol rules. And though we might take that for granted, what do those rules possibly say about the orcs? Or is GW just coming up with its own thing? So today I am pulling up the Ard Mob rules. If you go to the GW app, you go to the Combat Patrol, the orcs actually have their Combat Patrol rules already shown. And what we're going to go over today is how the rules somewhat mirror what we actually already see from the Armageddon box release and the rules that have been shown. Yet there are distinctions here. So I just want to kind of unpack it, bring it to people's attention, hopefully answer some questions for the newer gets on why this might be this way, or is this actually telling us more than most would expect? So let's kind of use our squig juices today and try to come up with this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Is this all just its own little sandbox, or is this going to be possibly hints of what the rules orcs will have in our codex? And we'll unpack it right here. Not take too long, but we'll have a good time with it. So, one thing I want to bring up here is the war boss. If you look on the left, their weapons do imitate and look exactly like the Armageddon box one, which we do know in the combat patrols, and look like the same exact model of the war boss. He's called the Ard boss in this case. GW did actually have this last edition where they had the Butcher Boys when they had the Snagga Boy Combat Patrol box. So having a name to the Combat Patrol box in itself isn't unique, just in case people were wondering. So that doesn't mean this is automatically a distinct data sheet or unit. Uh, in the past, Combat Patrol rules for the data sheet were the same rules as they were for the actual full game. And of course, the first thing people are going to say is, well, this might just be an isolated sandbox because it's on a smaller scale and maybe they weakened the rules. Maybe, yeah, that would be another learning curve. That would be a little bit of an extra wrinkle for a newer player that we're not sure if that's something GW likes to do, try to confuse more new people with, well, this is this rule for the same model, but in this game, it's a different one, right? We see that in Kill Team, but is Combat Patrol going to work the same way? You can see that in this case, the data sheet Warboss has smash him up, so he can select lethal or sustain to instead of having his normal +1 to hit. Uh, we do like sustain as orcs. We also appreciate lethal because toughness sometimes can be an issue. Though +1 to hit is great and something that we always kind of fall back on. Another thing the war boss has, if he's going to stick around the same cost with his data sheet compared to something like the big boss, the differences would also be the leadership. On the war boss, the big boss has +1 to charge, and the war boss crumps much better. But the war boss, other than that, looks about the same. Is this enough, reason to suspect that they would be changing things? The wall rule also, if you see for faction ability, is still the same wall that we currently have in the app as well. Is that going to change? Not sure. But now something I was happy to see is at least the Ard Mob Weird Boy does look like he has a proper data sheet now in this case, right? So the Ard Boy Weird Boy, if you look at his melee, he looks a little tougher. He looks like he hits a little tougher. His shooting or his psychic power is a little tougher than we typically see at 2K. So the Weird Boy um, currently only has his 3 attacks at -1 D3, and then for ranged, he only has one shot. And I'm pretty sure it's still the same way a little bit in the the Armageddon combat box. But here he has a hazardous type, so he can power himself up. He has a more of a blast kind of shooting. This is more in line with current like Space Marine type offensive power from a psychic unit, right? So they have multiple versions of their psychic blast. They also have a new ability on his data sheet, which is objective control, which is interesting to see that not be on the boys. So, what rules do the boys have? So, this is definitely a change to his data sheet in ways that I actually appreciate. He fights a little better, he shoots a little better, but the sticky is also something that was very appealing that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. Are the boys losing sticky objective? Currently, it doesn't have the weird boy jumping. Again, this pulls me back. That goes, well, maybe this is just combat patrol because being able to uppy downy and combat patrol isn't really that helpful compared to having sticky. So this was something that again I lose to. Could this just be its own sandbox game with a slight variation of the rule? And is that helpful to newer people? Then we go to the Gretchen. So the Gretchen as well, everything lines up about as normal offensive profiles. They got a little pistol. They also have a lava bomber, which a lava bomb, which is like their own little mini grenade, which is just 1 damage. Hits on forward -1 AP. I think that's sick. I hope they keep something like that if the Codex does come out with something like that. But their actual data sheet ability looks insanely powerful if it was to translate to a 2K game, the game itself. So what happens is if the unit's fully destroyed, the Gretchen unit, then it gets put into strategic reserves and come back onto the field as a deep strike unit, and it's a once per game ability. So if Gretchen somehow get this, of course, remember we're not going to have. This is all assuming this is like a codex showing rules. I'm not sure because that's a very powerful rule, but very thematic, very narrative, and would make Gretchen way more interesting than simply backline screaming units. So not sure if we're going to get that rule. Again, it brings it to my attention though because it's such an interesting rule. So I would love it. It reminds me of the Green Tide, that rule that we used to have where you could bring back mobs of boys. So in this case, you'd be bringing back possibly mobs of Gretchen. It does come to my attention that again, remember when you're reflecting on this, when you look at the Space Marine rules, also the Space Marine rules are less, we'll say, competitive, in my opinion, to a degree. Yeah, you're going to see as we go through this, some of the rules are translating from what we've already seen, transition, excuse me, from what we've already seen into even combat patrol. So, like the Space Marine Land Speeder still has its shoot and scoot ability. So, the captain's ability is like a free heroic for flat 6 movement when you do the heroic. So these are all rules that are actually somewhat reasonable and don't seem to be sandboxy if you look at the Space Marines half. It's really the Orc half where you're like, well, this is so different. Is this just a different rule set? That's kind of what's being brought to people's attention and their question. And then we also have the Ard Boy. An Ard Boy is just a boy. Now, the thing that makes this one, again, a little bit more like, oh, it's just talking about your combat patrol game is you just have a basic big choppa, and then you also have a secondary choppa. It doesn't even show extra attack. Maybe it's just a miswriting, whatever. But then it just shows the big choppa, like what would be the normal assigned kit when you buy the combat patrol box. So does it make sense? Sure. But for the actual data sheet ability, when this unit's engaged, get +1 OC again. Amazing if that translates over to the 2K game. We would love to see Orc Boys having 3 OC while they're in combat. And then we also have the Banner Knife introduced to the game. So OC bombing could be back on the menu even more so than it is now. But we also looked at the range profiles, and those look the same of what we've seen from the new Orc Boy data sheets, right? Where they have the shooters and everything like that. So that was another one that was making me think, question back and forth. This profile doesn't necessarily look right, but the data sheet ability looks very, very appealing in that way. And then what really brings it all together that makes me think there is a chance, just as much as there's a chance that it's a sandbox, but maybe even more so that these are actually the transitioning hinting to the rules, because when we look at the war track itself, its offensive profile looks exactly the same as it currently does in Armageddon box, in the Codex. It looks like what GW wants to be giving us already, and that data sheet is directly transitioning over, as well as its data sheet ability for when it suppresses a unit. 100% stayed the same as well. So the units that are already new kept their profiles. So that's what leads me to think, well, maybe these are just the rules being shown, um, that could possibly end up going into the codex. So if anyone's wondering, there is a small chance to conclude my assumptions or my what I'm trying to unfold here is that there's a chance this is a sandbox game that GW reevaluated their combat patrol and realized it's not as fluid to play or friendly to play because their real data sheet abilities and some of the profiles are wildly too strong or irrelevant. So there's a chance that GW said, well, this specific game mode, we have these specific rules to make it easier, more conducive for players. But like I said earlier, just giving more rules to models that look exactly the same but are supposed to transition to the exact same style of game of Warhammer 40K, the full game itself, giving these units different abilities and then telling those same newer people that are buying these boxes, well, they don't have those abilities in this game, just in that game, could be a reason why people don't think that that's actually what they're doing, because that's not how it's been historically. Yet, this is a new edition with a lot of new kits and a bunch of new waves to come. So, nonetheless, I'm still excited and wanted to show you guys this. I think some of these abilities look super awesome and powerful, like the boys one, the Gretchen one. The War Boss, on the other hand, a little bit of a downslide. I love my +1 to hit. I A little bit of a weird overlap with the big boss. But that being said, if they transition as we see them, we have no idea what the synergies would be with the Codex. So there's no reason to poo poo them either or being necessarily negative about them. This was just food for thought. This was just a fun observation and just something I wanted to bring to anyone's attention as we move forward looking into the edition with all the box sets. So once we figure that out, hopefully we get more answers. But for all the new gets, there's always one thing to keep in mind is get that launch box and get stuck in, lads, because we'll knock your teeth out.
If you enjoyed the clip, check out the full video here. If you'd like to see more tactics, click here.
Let's get stuck in, lads!